So, how do parents cope with mum, dad, I'm gay? Unfortunately, from the experiences I've heard about from friends, coming out is not always plain sailing. And even today, in this so-called enlightened society in which we live, some parents are still more than happy to disown their own children, simply because they can't accept that they were born slightly different from their peers. I've been very lucky in that my own parents accepted my sexuality without question. I'm sure it took them time to get used to the idea, but once they had, our bond only became stronger. I wish it could be the same for everyone. One gay friend of mine, Paul, came out to his parents at aged 18. He'd already found a partner and they were setting up home together. On the night he decided to tell his parents, he couldn't have foreseen their reaction. His father, who was a big burly Scotsman, went absolute ballistic. He grabbed Paul by the throat and beat him back black and blue. He finished his abuse by kicking his son up the street and telling him never to visit and never see him and his mother again. As far as they were concerned, they no longer had a son. Paul had to go to hospital to recover from his injuries, which included a split lip and broken ribs and numerous cuts and bruises. Some time later, he said it wasn't the beating that hurt, but it was the fact he'd been disowned. Even Paul's sister was banned from speaking to him under threat of the same fate. Paul and Mike had been happy together, but Paul could never seem to settle properly. He stayed with Mike for 5 years, but much of the time he was unhappy. When they split up, Paul went a bit off the rails. He started sleeping around, substituting sex for the love that he was missing elsewhere. He moved to London, cruised the gay scene for 2 years. Then I heard the awful news that he'd contracted AIDS and had died of pneumonia. He was just 26. As far as I know, his parents still don't even know that Paul was dead. Another friend, David, was a nurse. He came from a wealthy family and always thought that his family would stand by him when he came out to them. Although his father seemed to accept it, his mother never could. She told David to stop being silly and to snap out of it. She accused David of only telling them that he was gay just to upset them. David, who was 18, was training at the time to be a nurse and was living in an apartment in Northampton. The rent was subsidised by his mother. She stopped payments on the flat until David saw sense. Of course, he could no more change his sexuality to please her than he could change the colour of his eyes. He moved into the nurse's home and earned some extra cash by becoming a barman part-time. He passed all his exams and became a state-registered nurse. 2 years passed. One day his mother rang him to tell him that she was coming into town and had booked lunch for them. She needed to see him, she said. David had seen less and less of his parents because if he did visit them, his mother would always start a row. On this day, strange as it was, the two met for lunch. They talked of David's father and of his own career and his hopes for the future. His mother was polite and softly spoken, even as she announced to David that after a long discussion with his father, they decided to write him out of their wills. If David ever decided to end this obsession he seemed to have with men and found himself a nice girl to marry, they might reconsider. David stared at his bouffanted, fur-laden mother and couldn't believe it. He quietly got up from his seat, picked up his plate of salmon and salad and plonked it squarely upside down over his mother's head. He turned to her as he left. She was sitting there with bits of lettuce and mayonnaise running down her hair and fur coat, and simply said goodbye mother. He never saw her again. David applied for and got a job as a steward on Britannia Airways and travelled the world. He was very good looking and was never short of boyfriends, but unfortunately he had one too many because he too died of AIDS. Again, he was only 28. I'm not trying to make a point that every gay man is destined to contract AIDS, and the gay community these days are supposedly more responsible than a heterosexual society when it comes to taking precautions. But maybe that if Paul or David had been shown love and support from the people who mattered most, they might not have felt the need to continually seek validation from so many partners. Although these are true stories, these two friends are in the section that I would mark worst possible scenario. Lots of gays and lesbians are given that much needed support and love from their parents and families and live long and healthy, happy lives. Even without that support, thousands find their own niche in life and manage to survive quite happily without their birth family around them. They create their own families of partners and like-minded friends, or enlightened straight friends. As the saying goes, you can choose your friends when you can't choose your family. However, isn't it much better for people, whatever their gender or sexual orientation, to have both family and friends around them? If parents would be open to the fact that maybe not all their children will grow up to suit the mould that they imagine for them, they could find that a new closeness could come from the openness and honesty that their children have shown them in coming out to them. It's probably the hardest thing a gay person has to do, and much courage is needed. Nobody wants to be a disappointment to their parents, but at the same time, they have no choice in how they were born. I recently had a straight friend at work who told me that his son had just come out to him, and although he was fine with it, he didn't know enough about the subject. Because he wanted to be strong for his son and not seem to be floundering, I gathered these bits of information for him from the American and British websites set up by parents of gay offspring, called Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and Families and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, depending on which country, US or UK. If you're a parent, friend or family member who has someone who's just declared their sexual orientation and are wondering what to do next, maybe contacting either of these organisations could be of some use. Have a good day and keep smiling. It's not the worst thing that can happen.